is Mukesh Kumar. I'm from Microsoft's database platform engineering group, and I'm responsible for increased automation and customer success, modernizing SQL, Oracle, mainframe, and other heterogeneous data sources to Azure database platform. And with me, I have Raj Pochiraju. Raj, quick intro, please.
Hello everyone, my name is Raj Pochiraju and I'm a principal program manager in Azure SQL Group. And my core focus is to develop and product manage the migration tools that really enable you seamless database migration from your on-premises to Azure SQL.
Perfect. Thanks, Raj. In this specific track, we are focused to talk about um, some of the marquee, customer engagements that we have driven, and from those engagements, the type of learnings we have harvested, right, as overall Microsoft engineering, right, and how and what exactly are we taking as learnings, and then scaling with this wonderful community of data platform summit audience, as well as partner ecosystem, the hosters community and system integrators community. That's something we will be focused on, right? And we thought of starting with, like, from our perspective, what are the different data triggers, data modernization triggers that we are seeing, right? And needless to say, right, like there are a ton of such triggers, right? And each one of you are expert and literally living day in and out, right? Solving some these challenges and handling these triggers, right? Uh, uh, and you will resonate with us that there are two type of high level. There are two types of triggers and drivers. One is which is primarily driven through the infrastructure, right? So infrastructure meaning you will when a customer is undergoing, let's say, a data center transformation, either for due to data center exit or the merging. I mean, those are some of the triggers where for some of the low-hanging workloads, customer may decide, let's optimize, right? And they trigger app portfolio optimization exercise. That's one. Second is, as part of that process, if there are business processes that are being merged and or being, bifurcated, another classic juncture where customers will undergo consolidation. Then end of support, whether it's a hardware end of support or software end of support, right? Sometimes packaged softwares as well as COTS softwares, they have shelf life, right? And for a specific version, and when that shelf life is reaching, customers are required to undergo a transformation, right? And that's again part of infra drivers. I mean, one can argue, hey, end of support is also part of security and compliance. Agree, it's not debatable, right? And many of these things, whether it's infra driver or app modernization drivers, they are all interrelated, right? And list goes on, and I'm not going to detail each one of them, but primarily data center exit, end of support, hybrid and coexistence scenarios. Hybrid, I'm sure all of you know, right? Like coexistence is a new term that we are learning, especially from heterogeneous sources where, post migration or modernization or data center asset is split, there are a lot of systems that have to coexist, not just by sharing infrastructure specific memory and cores and storage. It's beyond that, right? And what does that beyond that means is data that's being stored in a system of record has to be aligned, it has to be in sync, right, with proper referential integrity with system of navigation or system of engagement. And for that, there has to be a bidirectional communication, right, from data flow and change data capture perspective. That's what we are referring here as coexistence. It's a very rapidly growing pattern that we see, which are triggered for data modernization. And infra side, last but not least, would be perf scale and cost scale, right? Like everybody needs a scalability to have some reasonable perf benchmark and continually improving performance benchmark. Same applies for costing, right? And And if that comes as a business requirement, that warrants a data tier modernization. And then from app modernization perspective, new market or new business functionality, for example, a customer using SAP or PeopleSoft, right? Some of the modules of SAP or PeopleSoft not worth spending and sustaining for next 10 years. They may decide to retire or replace that whole business process, right? And they undergo a massive transformation. They rewrite the application stack. They re-envision the infrastructure and deployment and hosting stack. And that comes under the new business functionality category, right? And that triggers a massive modernization involving a significant effort on data tier side, right? And then the new market here, where a customer or a enterprise doing business in, let's say, APAC, wants to come expand its business to Europe or US, right? That will come under new market trigger, which will require a massive data tier modernization. Security and compliance, very common thing. Many of us are dealing with this day in and out, right? Initiative around cloud native, where, let's say, as part of end of support or as part of retiring or replacing an existing application, enterprises often decide to go cloud native and say, hey, let's write from scratch, right? We will completely rewrite, or we will completely, start a thought process from greenfield perspective, right? And re-envision how my app and actors and user behavior should look like, right, for that application. And when that happens, there's a massive data modernization that has to take place. And please keep in mind, when any of these activities trigger, the data modernization is not limited to just that specific app, right? As you would know, imagine, and you are dealing with this day-to-day basis, is when such app, the re-envisioning happens, the upstream and downstream systems have a huge role to play, right? And they also undergo a massive consolidation, right? Either as a recipient or a subscriber, publisher or a subscriber. That is also considered under data modernization. And then application developer and innovation that continuously happens in any enterprise, right? That warrants for a multi-level of data modernization. So these are some of the triggers and drivers that we are seeing. And consistently, we are tracking these across different customer engagements that we are globally engaged on. Moving to next slide. I mean, I've talked enough about multiple drivers and how that reflects and how that maps to different triggers. But this slide is a good. I thought of coming up with this slide that will give you a little more tangible outcome, right? And picture around what do we mean by these data tier modernization, right? So here we have just focused on three major database platform. One, of course, SQL Server, which are currently in on-prem, or Rackspace, or with AWS, right? How are those applications being modernized, right? And then our focus is also on a couple of tier one compete of SQL Server, like Oracle and DB2 deployments that we are seeing being modernized to Azure Database Platform. And this particular slide gives you a good view of how SQL Server on-prem, right, is going to multiple targets. For example, if you see just SQL Server, Azure Data Platform gives SQL Server on-prem or VM, right, as an option. Same platform gives SQL DB complete PaaS offering, right? And then you also get SQL Managed Instance, where you have PaaS at the same time, very exclusive access with the granularity that you might need for some of mission-critical workloads, right? And in this percentage, I think I should explain what this percentage means. Like, so based on our data that we are capturing, right, we are seeing that 42% of SQL workloads which are truly being modernized, they're coming on SQL MI as target, right? 27% of them are coming on SQL DB. Again, this is just a percentage that we have tracked, right? And understand that these are truly modernization fueled engagements, right? This has no industry relevance. I want to caveat this. There is no benchmarking or baselining that any one of us should do based on this percentage. It's a pure representation of what we are seeing as a trend. Given 100 engagements, how many of them are landing on SQL MI versus SQL DB versus VM when source is SQL Server, right? Similarly, for Oracle, you will see that Azure PostgreSQL has close to 50% of share when it comes to Oracle modernization. And that's by design, not a news to you, right? And remaining 50% is coming on SQL and Cosmos DB, right? In this whole, same goes for DB2, right? SQL DB, because most of the mainframes are being re-engineered or data being ingested to realize a true value after doing cloud native transformation. So SQL DB has one of the highest percentage, same in the same way SQL MI and ADLS, right? This slide really gives you a picture of when a customer of whether SQL Server or Oracle or DB2 comes to you, any one of us, right? I think this slide gives us very good confidence that Azure and Microsoft has the platform that gives maximum choices for all our customers to choose from. And this is the key message I want to deliver, that there are a lot of options for these sources like SQL or Oracle or DB2 to go to, right? In market, we have AWS, we have GCP, we have Oracle themselves, and then we have Azure and Microsoft enterprise platform breadth, right? This is a very good evidence that suggests that when customers are truly looking for choice and really want to not just do POC or pilot, but to sustain the migrated workload long-term in production environment, Microsoft has the best to offer. And please note that some of these statistics and the targets that we are sharing here, these are all running in production. These are not from POC. These are not from hypothesis, based on high-level hypothesis or evangelism. Okay, these are all running in production, and this should give you a good picture of, this also ties back to some of the drivers that we talked, right? Majority of these customers, right, whether it's a SQL Server customer, Oracle, or DB2, they have undergone and dealt with all those drivers, right, and ended up modernizing on these targets. In the next slide, like we talked about drivers, we talked about source and targets. I think it's important topic to discuss, like what are the patterns we saw, right? Through those drivers, when an enterprise decided to undergo a modernization, right? As Microsoft engineering, what frequent patterns we saw, right? And specifically those patterns which are complex in nature to deal with, right? So here are some of those complex patterns that we have made a note of, and we thought of sharing with you, right? Not because you don't know how to deal with it, right? It's not for that. It's because we know that we have a struggle solving some of these complex patterns. And it's our responsibility to make this community aware that when you see this, when you see some of these patterns, don't hesitate to ask for expert advice, ask for expert help, either within your own organization, look for subject matter experts, or reach out to Microsoft reps locally, right? Many of you have direct one-on-one Microsoft reps mapping done at customer level or partner or SI level. Please leverage those channels, right? Within your own enterprise, either you yourself are an expert or you know the experts who might have done this very efficiently, very proficiently, and unblocked many customers, right? So this list is really a warning for all of us, right? Rather, word of caution that if you're running into some of these patterns, ask for help or ensure there is an expertise, right? For example, of course, like performance optimization, not a news to you. You know that perf optimization happens in various shapes and form, requires various levels of proficiency to really help customer, accept and adopt a workload post-modernization, right? And performance optimization plays a huge role in that, right? And just so just so we are clear, right? Performance optimization is not always post migration, right? It's also during migration. And for me, performance optimization here is not just pure OLTP transactions that an application does with backend, but I'm also referring here the change data capture performance, data transfer performance, right? How efficiently and effectively a large database can be transferred over from one source to a target on Azure Database Platform. They are all abstracted when I say performance optimization. So you can understand the complexity that we're trying to highlight here. Next is networking, security, and integration. I'm sure all of you will agree with me. This is a place. These are some of the use cases where most of the project mobilization effort and troubleshooting efforts are spent, right? Security in this mix is very critical because security is not just infra or like your data center and on-premise security, but you're talking app domain and data storage security and data transfer security. So you're talking the whole spectrum. All reference layers of OSI is implied when I say networking, security, and integration. And that's a place where we spend a lot of cycles, right? And it brings a lot of various types of complexities. Third we have is where if you're dealing with, let's say, SQL assets which are hosted in AWS or Rackspace, right? How can we efficiently bring them to Azure SQL DB, MI, or Hyperscale, right? Again, if you're dealing with a small size, right, things are slightly easier, but the database size increases, number of databases and dependent clusters increases, it adds exponential complexity to migrate and cut over, right? And that's something all of us should watch for, right? And if you are running into such scenarios, we should make sure that we are equipped with best practices and support and help and SMEs who can really help us, right? Next, I've already talked about VLDB. Like VLDB, very large databases are complex in nature to migrate, not just from other infrastructure, but even from SQL on-prem to, if you want to bring that to SQL MI or DB or VM on Azure, right? So very large databases and multiple layers of dependencies across clusters add to the complication. That's the message we are trying to pass here, right? Post-migration tasks, again, not a news to, it should not be a news to many of you. I have given a reference of post-migration tasks like data validation, change data capture, right? Making sure that the performance of CDC matches to what upstream or downstream systems require. They add a lot of complexity, right? And post-migration, things like data validation, right? Very important activity that we must do, and it brings a lot of complications, right? Starting from, let's say, a proper correlation, actual data type and the data format atomicity, right? That you have to check, and then post-migration for various authentication and authorization requirements at application layer and interdependent systems level, you need to make sure that you have the Windows logins also migrated and simplified under most likely a new directory claims structure, right? And these things add a bit of complexity, right, in this whole process. And it's very important to call out because often when we talk about data modernization or migration, we restrict ourselves to schema and data migration, and we don't worry about CDC. We don't worry about a bunch of other things which are very critical post-migration to even sustain the workload, right? Otherwise, we can do as much migrations we want. If they are not sustained, it's of no use, right? Effort goes in vain, right? And then in going down the list, things like how do we make sure that our first-party tools that Raj is going to take a deeper dive on, right? They are scalable. We build products, we take care of scalability, we take care of customization and configurability. But let's face it, right? Customers and applications have unique requirements. And often we run into situations where there is a need for even increased automation, right? More configurability. There's a need for even more optimal sizing, right? How do we further hyper optimize the SKU recommendation, right? How do we make sure that if a customer is going to provision hundreds of VMs or hundreds of database instances, right, their provisioning experience across the spectrum is seamless, right? And that adds to complexity and bunch of things where these are some of the activities where you really need to have the expertise. And if you sniff any of these in your project, please mobilize and ask for help, right? Reach out to subject matter experts. And then down in the list, like there are a lot of compliance and regulatory requirements where customers' use case would demand that you have a reverse migration capability, right? And like list is endless. We could have added 50 more, right? But we wanted to restrict ourselves to the newer pattern and the frequent patterns that adds complexity in this list first, right? And then last one is like, please make sure that you are really benefiting from one Microsoft investment and partnerships that you have available, right? Please understand that you don't have just engineers or business professionals from Microsoft who are dedicated to make you successful, but you have commercial engine also that you should help. And why it is necessary is because when you are doing a, let's say, source to target migration, you not only need architectural help or product related help, but you also need licensing help, right? You also need help to make sure that your post-modernized solution has a strong GTM, right? And if possible through Microsoft Marketplace or through other established GTM channels. So there's a lot of potential, a lot of possibilities if you are really truly leveraging from one Microsoft partnership. And these are some of the patterns with complexity that we wanted to make you aware. I think this slide literally filters down and gives you an extract of the technical and functional blockers, and many of these I have already talked in last slide, right? Like VLDB, I talked. Minimal downtime during cutover, irrespective of what the source is, right? It's very critical to have a solution in place either through first party or through third party or through customization where customer would feel good that and convinced that you're going to give them minimal downtime during cutover. Otherwise, I have seen projects going down very fast, right? And this is something I wanted to highlight as one of the functional and technical blockers, right? And then whether you are migrating Oracle or DB2 or SQL, right? Some of the data types, data transfer rates are really good. It meets the SLA, it meets the transfer and cutover downtime, but there would be some of those data types that needs special privileges like blob or large data types, right? Make sure that you are accounting for those complexities, right? And you're aware of those blockers. And then data ingress, I mean, egress we always talk, right? But ingress is equally important, right? Especially when you have downstream and upstream systems pulling or pushing data from your data tier, right? And you need to account for complexity that it introduces, right? If your solution must have performant data ingress, okay? Retry logic, whether you're doing first-time data migration or change data capture, right? Retry logic at various layers is very critical, right? Sometimes, like we are going to take a couple of examples in next slides where we will show you some of the examples. But at a high level, if I can give you a quick example, will be Microsoft first-party tools like DMS giving you retry logic at its transport layer, right? Is just one of the layers. When you have other systems, let's say packages written in SSIS, right? And they're doing continuous change data capture and few other activities, right? In the form of SSIS, they also need to have retry logic, right? That's absolutely next layer of a different layer of retry logic that you have to implement and account for, right? I talked about data validation. SKU recommendation is really critical. Like if you, in many of the execution migration factories that we have seen with large customers, right? One of the most successful and very I would say time saving use case that we have done is at those engagements where SKU recommendation complexity is resolved, right? Like each environment is different, each workload is different, and by doing pilot and doing proper inventory and ingestion of the type of assets, right? Sooner we learn, as quicker and as sooner we learn how a source to translate into target SKU, faster the whole migration factory execution model looks like and becomes, right? So it's very important that when you are starting an assessment process and inventory process, you are leveraging from the best practices of the SKU recommendation that comes to you shipped from Microsoft, either in the form of, let's say, DMA or DMS or Azure Migrate. And again, Raj will talk more on those topics, on those tools. But even on top of that, if you find other custom assets and blog posts that talks about some of their findings and how they improvise the SKU recommendation, please leverage from those, right? What I would suggest not to do is start from scratch and try to do it on your own and take a lot of time, right, upfront as part of the assessment process, and then you are going to compromise with the quality of actual migration and post-migration time frame, right? So very important that you build on top of what Microsoft is giving you in the form of first-party tools, and leverage from community and the custom IPs that Microsoft publishes and the partners publish, right? I have talked about coexistence, and bidirectional sync is again part of the coexistence strategy, where specifically you have upstream and downstream systems dependent on change data capture, right, both ways. So these are some of the blockers, and in the next slide, right, here what we have done is I'll be talking two examples. These are unfortunately private references. These are not yet public reference, but very unique case of tying back to most of the triggers, drivers that we talked, right? Modernization drivers, and the blockers that we talked, right? And the power of how, and the fact that many of these complex migrations are not resolved just by using first-party tool, right? Whether it's a Microsoft first-party products or tools, or SAP or IBM for that matter, right? Reality is enterprises have its own challenges. If you know efficiently how to use these first-party tools and products, you have better chances of doing customization and tailoring these products, right? Working and execution runtime to to really suit your requirements, right? And with that background, let me talk about this particular customer, one of the leading retail customer who wanted to modernize their ePlum and several other dependent applications to Azure, right? And their existing SQL Server was on the VMware instances, and they were looking to do this large scale modernization of SQL assets to Azure SQL, and they were open for whether open for write SKU, as long as a write SKU across the Azure SQL infrastructure, like the surface area, whether it's VM or SQL DB or MI, as long as we could maintain their existing SLA on-prem, A, B, as long as we could maintain the overall costing model or optimize their existing TCO model, they were looking to undergo this massive transformation, right? And for this, as this diagram, the top diagram suggests, right, we used the DMA, right, and the partner, the SI system integrator who was working with us, they built a very custom solution using the DMA and they populated the whole assets and inventory in a Power BI dashboard, right? And based on their domain expertise and application knowledge and the knowledge of the VMware infrastructure, I mean data center where the SQL instances were deployed, they came up with very nice and custom report of weight planning, assets categorization, and for each asset, right, what the target would look like, right? And what they also did is they clustered and grouped those applications in various categories and did a POC with us, proof of concept, to really firm up some of the FUD factors they had, right? And after they were convinced on the technical and functional blockers that these are resolved, and they tweaked their scripts, they tweaked their migration strategy, they buttoned it up, they met most of the production requirements they are expected to provide and give SLA for in non-production environment during POC. They felt good about automating and really codifying the whole migration experience. And in this process, what they did is they created a custom script, right, using the restore full backup process to restore assets which are meant for SQL Server to SQL VM. And they used the DMS, which is first-party tool, and they automated the whole process end to end to migrate some of the assets from, the relevant assets from SQL Server to SQL DB. Okay, and in this process, they, as I said, as part of the POC and pilot, they modularized a lot of the pieces where they would have been required to do manual work. Actually, they scripted it, right? And we jointly wrote the PowerShell, custom PowerShell script to make sure that their source to target journey is seamless. And in this process, various retry logics were used, right? We accounted for VLDB, we accounted for post-migration sanity test, right? And many of the blockers that we talked, right, they were baked into this experience for this customer when they embarked on this large SQL asset modernization. The next example is from a European market, one of the largest shipping and logistic customer who wanted to modernize their mission critical parcel application. And their current system had 25 terabytes of SQL Server, very large database, right? So in this process, I mean, they worked with us, they used the partners and partners tools and SI teams domain expertise in this area, and worked with us to really take a step-by-step but very educated and predictable steps, right? So they mitigated a lot of risks upfront. They took the benefit and they leveraged the experience that Microsoft engineers and the partners brought on table, right, to deal with such a large database, and not just large database. Post this migration, we had to ensure that we are meeting or beating the on-prem performance with this 25 terabyte mission critical system parcel application for this shipping company. So what they did is they used the first party offering again, Azure Data Box, right, to ship such a large database. And from there, after the first time restore happened, right, on Azure side, they used the transaction log backups to really bring the standby database on Azure in sync, right, with their on-prem. And from there, they used first-party tool called Smart Bulk Copy. Many of you might have used it, and they migrated data to SQL DB Hyperscale. And I'm sure, like if you know the SQL Azure Data SQL different SKUs and service models, Hyperscale is the one which can accommodate such a large database, right, like 25 TB plus. So they successfully migrated this data from a standby instance to SQL DB on Hyperscale. And in this process, although Smart Bulk Copy is first-party Microsoft product, Microsoft, we work together with the customer to ensure that this scale of the requirement and some of the uniqueness in their infrastructure is customized in this utility, right? Excuse me. And then there were other requirements because there were some transaction log backups happening across throughout the time when this migration was happening. There was a need for us to do append-only delta change sync, right, between the standby environment and SQL DB hyperscale. And for that, we wrote SSIS package to do that append-only data insert. And at the same time, we use the same package to also ensure referential integrity and data atomicity post-migration. And after that, we did a application perf tuning, and I'm pleased to inform that this application with such a mission critical and such aggressive SLA is phenomenally working on SQL DB hyperscale. It's not a public case study. We are hoping this to be soon to be a public case study, and we'll be very happy to share this with all of you. But the message from this is this slide is really to tie back the blockers and the triggers that we talked about, and how exactly and why exactly we say that a combination of first-party expertise, ability to do customization, right, and ability to understand what post-migration complexities you may face, and you be ready with that is so critical. That's the message we wanted to send with this slide, right? The next couple of customer I thought it would be very good to talk to this community. So far we have talked about all the SQL modernizations we have done. I want to make sure that this community understands Microsoft is very serious about heterogeneous sources. Heterogeneous being heterogeneous for us, which is Oracle or mainframe or Sybase or any other non-Microsoft database platform, right, that customers are currently running. If they want to come on Azure and data platform, we are here to help, and we are successfully helping hundreds of customers as we speak. And this is a classic example of medical card system, MCS, who have recently undergone a AS400 mid-range modernization to SQL MI. And as you can imagine, being a compliant industry player like medical card system, they have a massive AS400 footprint, and they were literally blocked, right, from a scalability and cost perspective to scale and go beyond what they're providing today. And their customers were craving to have agility. Customers were urgently needing, ability to do more analytics, more OLAPs, right? Very efficient OLTP for with new business functionality as well as new market expansion, right? And in this process, MCS partnered with Microsoft, and we helped them migrate their AS400 system into SQL MI, SQL Managed Instance. And from there, after this migration, they're really unblocked, not just for their short-term or medium-term goals, but also for long-term. And they are one by one bringing more workloads to SQL MI from this AS400 very unique legacy system. And we thought we'll share this with you. It's available publicly in the slide deck. You can read the full story on the left-hand side, and you can quickly Bing also, and you'll find it. The next one is Geico. I mean, many of you might know that 80% of global system integrators on this planet are working with MyGeico to help them undergo massive transformation for their internal line of business applications, as well as the go-to-market solutions that they have in the industry domain, insurance domain. In this process, there are petabytes of data, hundreds of applications that are being optimized from portfolio perspective, and they're being modernized. And mainframe being the system of record for this company, and system of record meaning 70% of their application and data, right? Mission critical application and data resides still on mainframe. And they took some time, worked with Microsoft, both on evangelism and research and development front, to really find out if they should land on where should they bring their COBOL workload and DB2 and other legacy data workloads onto Azure, right? And they carefully chose .NET and SQL. I'm very happy to inform that they have brought many workloads on .NET and SQL, and they're in process of bringing multiple other workloads. And we are evolving and learning a lot of good patterns, right, with these engagements. It's worth a study. I would suggest go read out Geico and MCS case studies and reach out to us, or either me or Raj, if you need to go deep dive, and if you have a customer who needs help with heterogeneous or SQL formalization. And with that, let me hand it over to Raj Pochiraju to go deep into Microsoft first-party tools and how these tools are meant to help you across different migration journeys. Raj, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mukesh. Let me start sharing my desktop. So Mukesh really talked about how the various migration trends are looking like, and he talked about migration drivers, the different migration strategies that the customers are adapting. And now my goal here is to, for next few minutes, my goal here is to, talk through the migration journey, how that migration journey is going to look like, and what are the specific tools that you can really leverage that Microsoft provided to you to take that kind of a migration journey. It is extremely critical that we really understand how the migration journey is going to look like, and then what it really means for each of those phases, and then do an effective planning for a successful migration as well as the modernization. And as you see on my screen, typically it has by the either you're modernizing or migrating, there are like 4 stages or 4 phases in a migration journey. And the very first phase is discover and assess, where you want to go and then make an inventory of all your servers, and as well as database servers, and application servers, and find out all those dependencies between those servers, how that infrastructure has been leveraged for supporting your workloads, and then really understand how many of these workloads are ready to migrate to Azure, and then which of these workloads are good fit for migrating with a rehost, or maybe a lift and shift, which workloads really benefit from refactoring. You really want to understand all this as part of the discovery and assessment phase, so that you can really plan your migrations accordingly, right? And then that's where you can really leverage our tool called Azure Migrate service, a fully managed service on the Azure that really help you to do that kind of a discovery and as well as the comprehensive assessment. And that output is going to show you, which of these databases are ready to migrate to Azure, which deployment option within that Azure is a good fit for migrating to. And then it also provides you the SKU recommendations. I know Mukesh talked about SKU recommendations is one of the challenges, and this tool really help you to find the right optimal SKU that you can be able to migrate, so that you will not have any issues after the migration is done. And then the next stage is, once which workloads that you want to migrate, when to migrate, and what migration strategy that you want to adapt. The next step is to literally execute that migration strategy, and then that's where it involves migrating your databases, migrating your logins, migrating your agent jobs and SSIS packages, any other dependencies that you really want to migrate. That's where you're going to be leveraging the migration tools and services that we built, that you can really help migrating those databases with a very minimal downtime migration experience. And then once the migration is done, you want to optimize. Once you get to the cloud, the next step is to optimize your cloud resources, so that you don't really over provision it, or you don't really pay more than what you need to pay. And that's where you can really leverage Azure Cost Management to really understand your existing costs and then optimize them. And then cloud really offers cloud native services that you can really leverage to secure your environment. And there are so many solutions that are there available that help you to monitor and as well as manage your resources. So once you get to the cloud, you start exploring some of those native cloud features to really optimize your entire workloads to begin with, right? So that is how the migration journey is going to look like. And now in my next step, at first let's examine each and every of these phase. For example, in the discovery phase, when there is a need for you to go and then collect the inventory, do the discovery, find the dependencies and do assessment, Azure Migrate service, a fully managed service on the Azure that really help you to do this, planning activity. And think about Azure Migrate is a one-stop shop for that really meets all your migration needs. It also provides a unified migration experience across your servers, databases, and as well as the applications. So think about that is kind of an hub that really meets all your migration needs, and it really supports multiple scenarios, like I mentioned, migrating your applications, database servers, and as well as the actual servers if you want to do the lift and shift migration as well. And then I'm going to give a demo how you can really leverage our Azure Migrate service to do the discovery and assessment phases. But before I go to the demo, I really want to show how the user workflow is going to look like when you start using the Azure Migrate service. So think about you have a existing data center. All these different servers and as well as the SQL servers are hosted in VMware environment. So that is where you really want to migrate to the Azure. And your first goal is to go and then discover all those SQL servers and really understand the readiness of those SQL servers migrating to Azure. And then you're going to be leveraging Azure Migrate. And as part of that, one thing that you need to do is you need to download an appliance. You need an appliance in your on-premises environment. Think about this is another VMware server, a unique VMware server, which has all the discovery and assessment capabilities that are built into that VM. And you can really use that. We can use that VM to probe the vCenter and then get the vCenter credentials and then start getting the inventory of all the servers and SQL servers. And then the appliance will go and then collect the deeper insights of your SQL servers. Not only the configuration data, but also we look for the performance data as well, just to map or recommend a proper SKU or an optimal SKU that really renders similar or a little bit of exceeded performance that your workload really needed when you migrate to the Azure SQL. So we really collect up to 30 days. We have a capability of continuously collecting that performance data up to 30 days. You can really configure between 1 week to 30 days as well. So first you need to download that appliance software. So then once you download that, then the next step is you start your discovery. You need to do some discovery configurations on the appliance, and then that appliance automatically start the discovery, continuously discovers the environment information, the metadata, the performance data, and then Azure Migrate really process all the data and then really give you the Azure readiness recommendations in terms of what deployment option is good fit for you, and then for a given deployment option, what SKU is the right fit for you. It really also gives you what type of migration strategy we would want you to adapt, whether rehost or refact. So it gives you some certain kind of recommendations as well. So that's how the Azure Migrate really works. You don't have to install, one thing to note, you don't have to install anything on the servers at all, on the production servers. We just need an appliance which remotely connects to the SQL servers in the VMware environment and then collects all those insights for us. Now let me switch to my demo. So I'm going to move to the portal experience here. Like I mentioned, Azure Migrate is a fully managed service on the Azure, which comes for free. So the very first step is you are going to be logging into the Azure portal, which I already did here, and look for Azure Migrate. If you already use Azure Migrate, you might see that in the dashboard, but otherwise you can really type for Azure Migrate service here. And then you can pick that service, and then it will take you to the home page of the Azure Migrate. Like I mentioned, this is a unified, this service really provides a unified migration experience across your servers and databases and applications. You see that. Now my goal is that I want to discover, and assess and migrate. So I'm going to click on this. And as part of that, the very first step is you need to create a project, a migration project at first to begin with. But you already seeing that my project already discovered some of the servers and SQL servers and provided some assessments as well. It is because that I did all this assessment ahead for this demo. But otherwise, I'm going to show you how to create a project at first as well. So you pick a subscription where you want to create a project and then give a name. So you pick a subscription where you want to really create a project and then pick a resource group or create a new one, and then just give a project names, and then also the geographical location where your data center exists. And then you just hit a create button. That itself is going to create a project for you. Once the project is created, the next step is to discover. So you click on that discover, and it has very simple steps that you need to go through to start the discovery on, right? At first, you need to tell us whether you're going to be using the Azure Migrate appliance to do the inventory and as well as discovery, or in case if you collected the inventory using any other tools, or maybe you have the list in a CSV file format, you can feed in that inventory to us so that we don't have to go through the discovery aspect of it. So in this case, I'm going to choose the appliance, and then my environment, my SQL servers are running on the VMware. We also have a support if servers are running on Hyper-V and as well as the physical servers. For now, I'm going to choose VMware here. And then remember I told you in the previous slide that you need an appliance. So you need to download an appliance. There are two ways that you could do. One is .voa file. Think about this as a template. You just need to download the template and then provision the VM using that template in your VMware data center. So that will have all the discovery and as well as assessment components that are required to do those deep discovery. That's the most easiest way of doing it because you don't have to do anything. You just provision a VM that itself will have everything that you need. But you already have a VM, for example, then simply you can really download this zip file that you can install the discovery and inventory software. So you can do either way. And then you give a name to the appliance and also generate a key. And we require this key when you really configure the appliance. So for now, give a name to it. And the next step is just set up the appliance. Just log on to that VM, maybe a remote desktop into it. And then you start configuring that appliance. And then the appliance immediately starts going about the discovery and aspects of it. So how to configure that appliance, I want to show that experience as well. So once you log into that appliance VM, you can launch the appliance configuration manager. And this is configuration manager is going to look like this. So at first it does some pre-checks, make sure that the appliance server has internet access to the Azure, and also it has a few ports that are being opened, all that. So it makes all those checks at first, and then you need to register that appliance. Remember I told you that you need to generate a key here. This is the key that you are going to be using it here to register. That way the appliance knows that which migration project that it needs to communicate. And then you also need to provide credentials for the vCenter because vCenter is the very entry point for us in terms of the discovery. So you need to make sure that you provide vCenter credentials and then provide us the Windows logins that we can really use, the appliance can really use to connect to the servers to provide a deep discovery aspects of it. So that can be a Windows server. If it has access to all SQL servers, you can do that, or maybe you can even provide SQL credentials as well. So we need to, in case if you have a multiple credentials, just provide all those multiple credentials in there. We know how to map the specific credential to a specific server because we do use a round robin methodology to really map the logins that you provided to various servers. So we know that you don't have to map those logins or anything. Once that is done, you just simply going to start the discovery. Right. So once you start the discovery, you can start seeing that discovery data populated into the Azure Migrate homepage. And you see that there are total 65 servers that are being discovered. And out of those 65, we know that there are 50 plus servers are running SQL servers on it. And then if you really double click on SQL servers, it will really give you more deeper insights about those SQL servers to you. It gives you for each of those SQL servers, I have some dependencies that I configured has some issues, but otherwise, this is how the output is going to look like. It gives you it even collects all the applications that are installed on the server. Actually, let me choose a different one rather. Maybe this one. Yeah. It collects all the applications that are installed on a given server. It provides all the inventory of it, including the SQL Server, .NET components, or any applications that are running on. It will give you all that inventory, and it also gives you the specific roles and features that are installed on that particular server. So it is a very comprehensive inventory data that we really pull out of it. It also shows you how many SQL instances exist in that particular server, and also it gives you the memory, disk, and storage configurations as well. In case if you go with the SQL servers here, then for each SQL server, it also gets you the databases information as well. So these are the number of SQL instances that are installed. It gives you the number of user databases that exist in a given server. And then it also gives you whether it is a failover cluster or not. So we have an ability that to detect whether SQL Server is installed on a failover cluster or always on is available, so that we can really map these high availability option to a deployment, a Azure SQL deployment option that can really render similar kind of high availability options that you might require. So that's the information that you can really get out of it. Once the discovery is done, the next step is you want to start assessment. And how do you start that an assessment? You need to create an assessment here. So there are few different types of assessments that are provided. So Azure VM assessment is the one in case if you want to really migrate lift and shift. For example, you have application servers, you just want to lift and shift them, but you still want to analyze them, then you can choose that one. But in case if you, in this case, we are trying to migrate to the Azure SQL, so I'm going to use Azure SQL as an option there. But the other cases, you can also choose in case if you are migrating applications to web apps service on the Azure, or maybe you are migrating your applications to containers, then you can use Azure App Service as well. Or in the last scenario where, in case if you just want to lift and shift the VMs, the Azure VM, the VMware VMs to our VMware solution on the Azure, also called as AVS, then you can use that service as well. So for now, I'm going to use Azure SQL, and then I'm going to show you that experience as well. There are default assessment options that are provided, but otherwise, if you want to really use more advanced assessment properties so that you really can cater those assessment results to your needs. For example, look at this target deployment type. So by say recommended means you are telling Azure Migrate that, hey, I don't know which deployment option, whether it is a SQL DB, SQL MI, or SQL servers or the VM, which deployment option that my workload can good fit. I don't know, you just recommend me, then it can recommend. Or if you have any target option in your mind, like SQL MI, for example, then you can really override that option as well, right? And then you can also say that, hey, I already bought 3 years of reserved licenses. So when you provide me cost estimates, make sure that you account for those reserved licenses that I already bought so that I know my costs very accurately when I migrate. And it also tells you how long you want to collect us to performance data so that we can really use that performance data to estimate right target SKU that we can produce to you, right? And then you can also bring the licensing options here, or more importantly, if as you already have the SQL licenses, you can really leverage the Azure hybrid benefits. So if you want us to cater your cost estimates by accounting the hybrid benefits as well, then you just let us know, right? You save all that stuff and you just run it. And when you run the assessment, this is how the assessment results are going to look like. And I got a bunch of assessments that I already performed, but for now I'm going to choose Contoso SQL as my assessment. So this is the assessment dashboard where you can see that different servers, different SQL instances, and number of user databases. This is the total number of databases that are installed on those, like close to 200 SQL instances. And remember that this can really operate at any scale. I have customers who used this service to really discover 20,000 databases across 5,000 SQL Server instances kind of stuff. So it can really scale well. And then here is the chart at a very high level for decision makers. It really tells you what Azure Migrate is really recommending in terms of a target deployment option by assessing your readiness, compatibility aspects, by assessing your features that are currently in use. And we also looked at your performance and everything. And this is the distribution, how the Azure Migrate is really recommending to go to various Azure SQL deployment options. So majority of the cases, it is recommending the SQL instances to go to MI. And there are a couple of instances we recommend to go to SQL DB. And then there are few more instances, maybe we should say you should go to Azure VM because we find some migration blockers. And to eliminate those blockers, it requires a lot of effort for you. So that's the reason we recommend you to go to VM instead of going into the PaaS service. A lot of customers does that too. They first migrate to the VMs and they stabilize in the cloud, and then they think about modernizing to the SQL PaaS services as well. And then once you go through, if you go through these recommendations, then this is how your cost is going to look like for all instances. So it tells you the compute cost and as well as the storage cost. right? Which includes the licensing benefits that you set in the assessment properties, whether you set hybrid benefits or reserved licenses, we account all those benefits. And then this is the most accurate estimate that you can go to as you go through these recommendations. Now I'm a DBA. I want to double click on few SQL instances that I want to manage. Then you can really go to the next level of detail where you can look at all the instances that are here, and it tells you for each, for example, this instance, right? It is telling you that it is not ready for SQL DB, but it is ready for SQL MI. And then obviously we recommend as an MI as a target, and we also provide you a specific SKU recommendation migrating to the MI. And it also tells you once you decide that you want to migrate, then you can use the tool to migrate as well. But in case if you are curious why it is not ready for SQL DB, you can click on that. It will give you why it is not ready for SQL DB. So for example, there is one user database. It has 4 issues altogether. That means they are the migration blockers. So this particular database is using a service broker feature, which is not supported on the SQL DB, but it is supported on SQL MI, Azure SQL MI. As you know, managed instance is a fully managed service on the Azure SQL PaaS, which really has 90 plus percent of compatibility with your on-premises instance model. So it's a great deployment option or a target to migrate or lift and shift your SQL Server instances to begin with. So this particular database has a blocker to go to SQL DB single database because it is using a service broker, and it really requires some refactoring stuff. Instead, you can go to SQL MI. So if you go to MI, you don't see any issues to begin with. So that's the reason we recommend you to go to MI. But there could be some instances not ready for both, not ready for SQL DB, not ready for MI. Then we would recommend you to go to VM, as we did not find any blockers to VM. So that way, this report really helps you where to go. You don't need to juggle between, do I go to MI, do I go to VM, or do I go to SQL DB? It really tells you. Microsoft really recommends you to go to a specific deployment option here. When both are ready, then we really look for, yeah. So in this case, it's ready for SQL DB and as well as for ready for MI. But then we recommended MI as a go-to target, because at that point of time, we look at all the SKUs in the SQL DB that can fit your workload. We also look at the SKUs that can fit your MI, and then we really compare the cost. Whichever cost that comes low, then we recommend that. So that way, without compromising your performance, your high availability, but we're still recommending you to the most optimal, on the cost-wise most optimal, SKU that we are recommending here. So that kind of intelligence is really added into these assessments actually. And then you can also recalculate the assessment if you want. For example, my assessment is already a little bit out of date. You can always hit a recalculate assessment so that you can really get the accurate recommendations. And at some point of time, you want to change this assessment a little bit. For example, you say that, that there are the properties right now. It is because it's outdated. It is not letting me to do it. But otherwise, you can really edit these things and then reassess your assessment as well. So that way, it really gives you a comprehensive recommendation in terms of not only discovering and also providing recommendations in terms of what deployment option that Microsoft thinks is better option for you, and then how much it really costs if you decide to go. And then it also gives you guidance which migration tools that you need to do the migration, right? So that's how you can really leverage Azure Migrate for doing all that stuff. And then the next step is really how to migrate. So far we did the discovery assessment and we know where to migrate, and how does the migration experience is going to look like. So for doing the actual migrations, we recently invested into Azure Data Studio, the familiar tool that you might be using it to manage your on-premises SQL servers and as well as the cloud assets. The same tool that you can really leverage to do the actual migration. So we really releasing a extension that you can call that as SQL migration extension within Azure Data Studio. You can simply launch Azure Data Studio, install the extension, and then do the migrations in a very simple steps, which I'm going to show the demo as well. But before I go to the demo, I'll showcase how does this whole thing works. So obviously, you have your SQL servers which are sitting in the on-prem, and then you're using the Azure Data Studio, which is also in the on-premises. You can really start your migration from your laptop with Azure Data Studio. All you need is that when you create a project in the Azure Data Studio, the one thing that you need to do is you need to download an integration runtime. So we leverage the Azure Data Factory framework to do the migrations actually. So that's one advantage. All the great features that we have in the Azure Data Studio in terms of resiliency, in terms of faster copy of data, uploading the data to Azure, we really leveraged all those features. And then you just need to configure that self-hosted integration runtime in your on-premises environment and then start migration. It's simply, we rely on the full backups and as well as the log backups to do the migration. So we pick up all those backups, and then this runtime host will upload those backup files, the full backup and as well as the log backup files to the Azure Blob Storage here. And then we start the service, the particular service or extension is going to restore all those backup files. At first, it restores the full backup and then start restoring all the log backups as they are available in that particular network share. And then it keeps doing it. So you haven't really started your migration downtime yet. When you establish this migration, you're simply saying that, hey, you take use of my backup files that are there in the SMB network share, full backup and as well as log backups, and continuously use those backup files to restore on the managed instance. And then, I will really decide when the migration cutover to happen, right? So that's how the experience is going to look like. And then let me show you in a demo how that is going to look like. So I need to log on to this server at first. Let me do that. While it is doing, I'm also going to share how the cutover experience is going to look like, right? So these are the steps I talked about briefly, but these are the steps. At first, you have application and databases, both are sitting in the on-prem. You started your migration so that you can really establish a backup plan, and then you start providing us the full backups and as well as the log backups, and migration is continuously happening. And when the cutover time comes, that's where you stop all the incoming traffic that is coming from your applications to on-premises database. You stop it, and then you take a final log backup, and then provide that final log backup in the network share, so that we can upload that backup and then restore as well, so that both source database and as well as the target are completely in sync and consistent, right? There is no data loss. And then you stop. You change the connection string, which was originally pointing to the on-premises to the new database. So that's how the cutover experience is going to look like. So I just want to show you that as well. So typically your downtime starts only at this phase, where you stop your incoming traffic that is coming into your source SQL Server database. Whatever time it takes to take the final log backup and upload, that is the only time that you uncover the downtime. And we have seen customers for very large databases, they were able to do these migrations with less than 15 minutes of downtime. So let us see how that experience is going to look like. Hopefully this can, yeah. So this is the Azure Data Studio. You guys are familiar with it. And then I already logged into the Azure with my Azure credentials here within that. And then this is my source SQL Server that I want to migrate to Azure to begin with. And then I already installed the Azure SQL migration extension. And then I just launched this through this. And now at first it is making sure that it is validating my account. And then it already picked up all the databases that exist on my source. And then at first I'm going to select all those databases. And then it also performed an assessment as part of that. Look at all those databases and identify how these databases are ready to various Azure deployment options. And then it is also providing me recommendations actually. In case if I want to migrate, 3 out of 8 databases can be migrated to managed instance. That means there are some databases that are not ready to migrate to managed instance. There are only 3. So if you want to find out why that, you can choose that as well here. For example, HR database, right? It has 3 migration issues to begin with. So one of those database compatibility is pretty low, 100, and on the managed instance we don't support 100. We only support 2008 and above compatibility levels. And there are, for example, this particular database has got multiple log files. With multiple log files, unless you refactor those log files to a single log file, you cannot use backup and restore technology to migrate to managed instance. So there are few databases that are not ready to migrate to managed instance. That's why we only say 3 out of 8, but 8 out of 8 are ready to migrate to VM. So for this demo, I'm going to choose this one as an example. Now, once you choose VM as your target based on this analysis, then the next step is you need to pick a subscription where your target VM exists. So I picked up my subscription, I picked up my location, and then this is the VM, which is a target SQL Azure SQL VM that I'm going to be migrating to, right? This is, I kind of already provisioned that VM, and I'm going to the next step. So there are two options: online migration. So remember, if you really want to minimize your downtime to last phase of the cutover, then you can use online migration. Whereas if you're doing a test migration to begin with or testing application, then you can simply use offline migration as well, depending on your need. I choose online there. And then my databases are in network share, right? So I'm going to provide all those backups are in network share. My backups are already exist here, so I'm going to provide them. But now I'm going to give a password for source, and then this is my network share where you can find all those backups. Like I showed you, all these backups are exist there, full backups and as well as the log backups. So, and then I'm going to be migrating HR database to HR. I choose only that database. And then the next stage, we need to find a particular storage account where we can be able to upload those backup files to that blob storage at first. So blob storage, first pick up the resource group where the blob storage exists, and VM, and then this is my storage. I'm going to go to the next step. The next step is you need to pick your database service. So for doing this, you need to create an Azure database migration service to begin with, which is a fully managed service. Again, no cost for you. You choose that one. It kind of validates. If you don't have that service, you can also create a new one. You can go through a few steps how to create that one. But I already have one. The status looks great. So I'm going to go to the next step. In the next step, this is just summary, which really telling you the source, target, and as well as the specific migration service that you're kind of using it. And then you just done, right? And then it will start your migration. Once the migration is started, you will know that, starting a migration for database HR, you can start viewing that migration status in this particular pane, right? So I'm going to refresh this to see if that is going to come. Yes, so one migration is in progress. This is the one that I created. Right now it is creating it. I'm going to refresh. I'm going to do the HR. So no, it's not. It's going to take some time to upload so that you can start seeing it. But otherwise, all those backup files are going to show here, and then it's going to start uploading them to the blob storage, and then it's going to start restoring them onto the managed instance. And this migration can continue for any long time that you want until you're ready to do the migration cutover. And when you are really ready to do the migration cutover, that is the time you stop all the incoming traffic that is coming into your source, and then provide the final log backup into this network share as well, and then make sure that that is also being restored. Let me refresh if it is going to come back. Yeah, but otherwise I will show you the previous migrations. I know some of the migrations are failed for me, but I still want to show you. See, this is how the output is going to look like. This particular migration is failed for some time when I did it last time, but it will show you all the log backups that are the full backups and log backups that are uploaded and restored as well. So, when you do the final log backup, you can see that status as well here. Once that is also restored, then you can call a complete cutover operation here. So that's how the experience is going to look like. Very easy to set up, very easy to monitor, and very easy to, it's still kind of creating. That's why you're not seeing your files here yet. Otherwise, you will start seeing it. But for the sake of the time, I'm going to go back to my slide deck. So that's how you've seen how we really leveraged our tools and services to do the discovery, assessment, and as well as the migration. And we want to provide to conclude this session. We want to leave you with some of the resources that you can really leverage to learn more about Azure SQL, and more importantly, Azure Migration Guide, which really provide a step-by-step guidance for a specific scenario and target that you want to really migrate. That is definitely a first resource that you want to really leverage when you really want to think about migrations. And then there is a link for Azure Migrate service as well. With that, Mukesh and I really thank you and enjoy the rest of the sessions in at the DP Summit. And we will talk to you next time. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, everyone.